Have you ever noticed how, so often, the very people who should value us the most are the ones who hurt us the deepest? It's a cruel paradox. We spend our entire lives sacrificing for those we love, only to be met with betrayal, humiliation, and disrespect. That's exactly what happened to me. My own daughter looked me straight in the eyes, in front of the whole family, and told me I wasn't worth anything. And here's where the real question lies. Does respect come automatically just because of blood ties? Or is dignity something that has to be earned day after day in every action? I found out the hard way. What my daughter didn't know was that while she treated me like a burden, I was quietly holding on to something that would change that story forever. A check for $750,000. Think about it. What would you do if someone you raised, educated, and supported all their life turned around and treated you like you didn't exist? Would you yell, cut ties, or would you wait for the right moment to show? Without saying a single word, that value isn't measured in empty talk, but in actions. What happened that night was more than just a reaction. It became a lesson, and I'm going to tell you, detail by detail, how humiliation turned into silent revenge, and how that revenge transformed into freedom. But be careful. This story might stir up memories of your own, because deep down, all of us have been disrespected by someone we least expected. I'll never forget that moment. We were all gathered as a family, chatting about small things, when suddenly, like lightning on a clear day, my daughter Madison shot out the phrase that cut through me like an invisible knife. "You're worthless." Strange, isn't it? How a few words can hurt more than any physical wound. Betrayal, coming from the very person who should have been my safe harbor, struck me with such force I was left speechless. It wasn't just the sound of her voice, it was the weight of public humiliation, right there in front of people who were supposed to be witnesses of love, not of contempt. In that instant, it felt like the ground opened beneath me. I, who had given so many years to her care, who had invested my education, my time, and my energy into building a decent future for her, was reduced to nothing in a single sentence. And don't think it was just about hurt pride. No, it went deeper. It was the crushing realization that respect, the very thing I had always taught as the foundation of any family, had been tossed aside like dust in the wind. The emotion hit me so hard, I could barely breathe. You know, people often think betrayal only happens in love affairs or in serious lies. But no, betrayal hides in everyday gestures, in words that seem simple but are poisoned. When a child looks into the eyes of a father who spent sleepless nights making sure their future was secure and says, "You have no value," that is betrayal in its purest form. It's the denial of a whole history of dignity carved out through sweat and tears. And maybe the worst part wasn't just her words. It was the silence in the room. Everyone heard, but no one spoke up. That reminded me of a tough lesson I learned back in my hospital days as a doctor. The worst pain isn't from an open wound, but from the absence of someone who could have stopped the bleeding. In family, too, silence in the face of injustice is like salt thrown on an already raw wound. At that moment, most people would have expected an outburst, an immediate reaction. But life had taught me something else. Revenge doesn't always need to be loud. Sometimes, silence is the sharpest weapon. I remember a patient once told me, after being humiliated by his co-workers, "Doc, I didn't have to fight back. I just let time prove who really had value." I kept that phrase in my heart as a reminder. Dignity isn't defended with shouting. It's proven through actions. So I chose silence, not out of cowardice, but out of wisdom. Because I understood that some battles aren't won in the heat of the moment. Those who lash out in anger may feel temporary relief, but they miss the chance to leave a lasting lesson. And let's be honest, teaching is one of the greatest duties of someone who's lived long enough. Education doesn't end when your child graduates college. It continues in every look, every action, every silence that speaks louder than sermons. But I won't lie, inside me, a storm was raging. I kept asking myself how someone who had received so much could give back so little. And maybe that's a reflection for all of us. How many times have you given your all to a job, to a relationship, only to be treated like you were invisible? It's painful, but it happens. The key is to understand that your worth does not depend on immediate recognition from others. True respect grows over time, and those who fail to learn that sooner or later face the consequences. That day, I chose not to defend myself. I simply observed. As Madison got up from the table with that air of superiority, I knew the story wasn't finished. Life is written in chapters, and this was only one of them. Deep down, I held something she didn't know existed, something that could completely change how she saw me, and that something was waiting quietly in an old leather briefcase in the corner of my office. It was in that strategic silence that I began to see a bigger possibility. to turn humiliation into opportunity. Because when someone tries to put you down, you have two choices: accept their judgment or use the offense as fuel to prove that worth isn't requested, it's demonstrated. And I knew my moment would come. Strangely enough, it wouldn't arrive with words, but with a piece of paper, forgotten, hidden away for years, that carried not just numbers, but a powerful life lesson. I stayed quiet, not because I lacked words, but because I knew silence sometimes carries more weight than any fiery speech. My whole life had taught me that. Back in the hospital, on nights when the chaos was overwhelming, there wasn't time for long explanations, just a look, and the team understood. That night, in the middle of my own family, I used the same strategy. I kept silent, not out of weakness but out of awareness. Silence has the power to expose who's truly wrong without raising your voice. As she spoke, my mind traveled back in time. I remembered sleepless nights, endless shifts, weekends I gave up just to make sure my daughter had education, comfort, and opportunities. I remembered when she came home with expensive college books, all paid for by my long hours at the hospital. I thought of every test I paid for, every patient I treated for free just so I could save a little extra for her future. Each memory weighed on my chest like a cruel reminder that, despite everything, I now stood invisible in her eyes. This is a dilemma many parents face, though few have the courage to admit it. We like to believe that family is a place of unconditional respect, but the truth is, it isn't always that way. Family relationships can also become a stage for betrayal, humiliation, and ingratitude. How many times have you heard stories of children turning their backs on their parents at the very moment they were needed most? It's painful to say, but it happens in countless homes, and silence often becomes the only defense for those who don't want to turn their house into a battlefield. The strange thing about silence, no matter how heavy it feels, is that it can also be liberating. When you choose not to strike back, you give yourself the chance to observe. Sitting at that table, I became almost like a spectator of my own life, and I noticed details that, in the heat of an argument, I never would have seen. The discomfort in some relatives' eyes, the unease of those who were silently witnessing injustice. Sometimes it's in that quiet space where we find proof that dignity still exists in the glances of those who respect us. But don't think that bearing silence is easy. It's like carrying a suitcase full of rocks, unseen by others, but crushing to the one who holds it. With every word she spoke, the weight on my shoulders grew heavier, and yet deep inside, there was still a flame burning. I knew I had something saved, something that could completely change the direction of that story. A memory hidden in the bottom of a leather briefcase, where old papers and forgotten objects told chapters of my life she knew nothing about. I like to compare that feeling to a seasoned chess player. Sometimes he lets his opponent advance, moving pieces with apparent carelessness, only to later strike with a quiet checkmate. That's exactly how I felt that evening. I didn't need to prove anything with words, because I already had a card waiting to be played at the right moment. And life is funny that way. Like fate plants small signs along the way to remind us that revenge doesn't have to be violent to be effective. Silence is also a teacher. It teaches patience. It teaches you to measure what truly matters. And above all, it teaches you to turn pain into strategy. Many think revenge is just an explosion of anger, but I learned that the most powerful revenge is built in silence, brick by brick, until one simple act topples the other person's entire castle of pride. And that day, my act was sleeping inside a briefcase, waiting to be awakened. It was under the weight of that silence that I remembered something essential. Dignity is never begged for, it's shown. I didn't need to beg for respect. I only had to wait, because deep down, I knew I had something tangible, something capable of rewriting that scene of humiliation with an unexpected twist. And the most remarkable thing was, it wasn't some distant future. It was right there, hidden among yellowed papers, waiting to be revealed. That night, after dinner, I slowly climbed the stairs to my study. The weight of silence still followed me like a shadow. I opened the door and found the same familiar scene. Shelves filled with medical books, diplomas faded with age, and in the corner, an old leather briefcase. That briefcase was like a quiet vault. It held not only papers, but fragments of my own history. It had been with me through years of long shifts, and inside it, I had hidden things no one ever suspected. When I opened it, the smell of aged paper mixed with memories filled the air, and there it was, tucked between forgotten documents, a check for $750,000. I picked it up and stared at the numbers. It was the result of a lifetime of work. Part came from a settlement after decades in the hospital, part from disciplined investments I had made along the way. It wasn't luck. it was planning. While others laughed at my modest choices, the old car I never replaced, the short vacations instead of lavish trips, I knew exactly what I was building. On that slip of paper was not just money, but the meaning of years of sacrifice. It's strange how people confuse simplicity with lack of worth. My daughter always assumed I lived a modest life because I had no other option. What she never knew was that behind the plain clothes and the unpretentious routine, I had been quietly building a solid reserve. This check was proof of that. Proof that dignity can be planned, that revenge, when carefully designed, doesn't come from impulse, but from patience. I didn't need harsh words. I had facts, and facts carry a weight no argument can overturn. As I studied the check, I remembered old conversations I had with young doctors about financial discipline. I used to tell them, don't spend your first paycheck all at once. Invest, save, because one day you'll need to prove, not to the world, but to yourself, that you made the right choices. Many laughed, called me old-fashioned, but now, staring at that check, I realized I had followed my own advice. It was almost ironic. The same man, accused of having no value, held in his hands a document that screamed the opposite, in bold, undeniable numbers. But this wasn't just about money. It was about symbolism. That check represented every night of humiliation I endured in silence. It stood for every time I was called outdated, every moment I was looked down upon for not flaunting luxury. More than that, it was living proof that dignity doesn't need to be announced. It can remain hidden until the right moment to be revealed. It's like a seed. It doesn't matter if no one sees it under the soil. It grows in silence until the exact time to bloom. In that moment, I pressed the check against my chest and thought about how life is full of ironies. The same daughter who said I had no value had no idea that I held in my hands the power to shatter her words into dust. But I chose not to act right away. Real power isn't in reacting in the heat of emotion. It's in choosing the right moment to act. I learned that in medicine, where each minute could mean the difference between life and death. In the same way, I knew this check wasn't meant to be used on impulse. It was meant to be kept, a key piece for the inevitable turning point life would bring. And that's when I understood. My freedom wouldn't come from yelling, accusing, or trying to prove my worth with words. It would come from knowing that, when the time was right, I held something that could dismantle that entire theater of disrespect. This wasn't about money. It was about silent justice. It was about showing, undeniably, that betrayal and humiliation might mark a moment, but they do not define a life. All I had to do was wait, because sooner or later, the perfect moment would arrive to place that check on the table, not as a piece of paper, but as a mirror that revealed who had truly cultivated respect and who had squandered it. And as I placed the check back into the briefcase, I felt that a story was only just beginning. I didn't know when or how, but I was certain fate would set the stage. And when the time came, that slip of paper would be more powerful than any words I could have spoken that night. That evening, I sat down in the armchair of my study with the memory of the check still fresh in my mind. I could have picked up the phone right then, called my daughter, and thrown the truth in her face. But I realized that would have been nothing more than an impulsive outburst, the kind that relieves you for a few seconds but leaves a hollow emptiness behind. Life had taught me that some decisions cannot be rushed. True revenge isn't born out of the heat of anger, but out of the cold of strategy. And in that silence, I chose to wait. It wasn't omission, it was wisdom. I remembered a colleague from my days as a doctor who used to say, "The patient doesn't die from the illness, but from a miscalculation." That phrase never left me, and when applied to life, I understood that acting at the wrong time is like prescribing the wrong dose. It can kill before it cures. My dignity didn't need haste. It needed a stage, a circumstance, a moment powerful enough to silence not just the voice of ingratitude, but every shadow of doubt before the entire family. As I thought about it, I began to reflect on how often we respond to insults right away, only to regret it later. How many marriages have ended because of words spoken in the heat of an argument? How many friendships have been destroyed by careless reactions? The silent decision is like holding back an arrow. You could release it now, but if you wait for the perfect moment, it strikes the target with far greater precision. That's exactly what I would do. I would hold my arrow until the exact time to let it fly. The humiliation I suffered wasn't something to be settled in hallway conversations. It wasn't just about me. It was about what my daughter needed to learn. Respect is not a coin you hand out when convenient. It's built day by day. And I knew that if I simply threw the truth at her, she wouldn't understand the lesson. She might even accuse me of arrogance, of trying to prove something. That's why I decided the check wouldn't just be an answer, it would be a teaching moment. I wouldn't reveal it in some casual exchange. But when there were witnesses, when life placed us in a situation where she would be forced to face her own choices, a decision like that requires patience. It's like tending a garden. You can't force a flower to bloom before its time, or it withers. The same is true for justice in family relationships. Often you must wait until circumstances ripen for the truth to blossom. That night, I decided to become the gardener of my own revenge. It wouldn't be an outburst of anger, but a calculated revelation. I wasn't seeking only to return the pain I felt. I wanted to show that dignity isn't begged for, it's demonstrated. Of course, silence comes with a price. It weighs on you. There were nights when I woke up thinking how liberating it would have been to shout at that dinner. But every time the urge came, I remembered a simple lesson. Those who shout show desperation. Those who wait show power. And I needed to prove not just to her, but to myself, that I was still in control of the situation. It was a matter of self-control, something all of us need to exercise. After all, how many times have we overreacted to small things, only to realize later we could have won with a single calm gesture? It was in that spirit that I made my decision. I would wait. I would keep the check, keep the silence, and keep my patience. And when the right moment came, and I knew it would, there would be no shouting, no arguing. There would only be an undeniable fact laid out before everyone. And then, the words that wounded me would be swallowed up by something far greater than any speech. And as hard as it was to endure, I began to feel a certain relief, because when you realize you don't have to react immediately, you gain freedom. It's as if you take the reins back into your own hands. And I knew, sooner or later, life would hand me the perfect occasion to use what I had kept hidden. A moment so strong no one could ignore it. A moment when silence would become a voice. And that voice, a lesson that would echo through the entire family. And, as life so often does, the stage didn't take long to appear. Sometimes the perfect occasion comes disguised as something ordinary, like a birthday, a party, a dinner where everyone gathers expecting nothing more than a pleasant evening. Little did I know, the stage was already being set, and soon the truth would leave the briefcase and take its place at the center of the table. The moment came in the most ordinary way, the way life often sets its most decisive scenes without warning. It was my grandson's birthday, and the house was full. Colorful balloons, children's laughter running through the halls, and the smell of fresh cake in the air. Everything seemed perfect. But for me, that gathering carried something far beyond celebration. It was a stage ready and waiting, even if no one else knew it. I was certain that, at some point, life would open the curtain for the truth to be revealed, and that truth was resting in the pocket of my jacket. Madison was there, of course, glowing in front of the others as if she were hosting her own private show. She treated me with the same disdain as always, that cold look of indifference which to me was just another silent knife. Anyone who's lived through this knows, humiliation inside the family is different, because the pain doesn't come only from the insult itself, but from the fact it comes from your own blood. She smiled warmly at others, but when her eyes crossed mine, it was as if she was staring at a stranger who didn't matter. Dinner began like so many others. Conversations about work, the kids' school, upcoming trips. I stayed quiet, observing, the way someone does when they feel they have nothing left to add. And maybe that was the image many had of me, an old, retired man, worn out, taking up space. That's society's great trap, to believe that those who have given everything have nothing left to offer. But I had already decided that night I wouldn't try to change anyone's perception with words. I would simply wait for the right moment. And then chance stepped in. Between one glass of wine and the next, my son-in-law, maybe out of curiosity or just to make conversation, asked, "James, do you still have that financial reserve you're always talking about?" The room fell silent for a few seconds, as if the question had landed awkwardly in the air. I noticed the ironic smile curl at the corner of Madison's lips. She didn't waste a second. Before I could even answer, she jumped in. "Oh, Dad, stop it. That story is just one of his inventions. He always talks about these reserves as if he were some great investor, but everyone knows it's just talk." Stifled. Laughter rippled among some relatives, and the mood, once light, now carried an edge of discomfort. Her betrayal once again wasn't only in the words themselves, but in the pleasure she took in diminishing me in front of others. Public humiliation. That old, suffocating feeling tightened my chest. But this time there was a difference. I held in my hands the key to turn the entire scene upside down. I looked around the table in silence. I could have answered right then, but instead I waited a few seconds longer, letting Madison's confidence swell. She believed she had me cornered for good, that her remark had stripped away the last shred of respect I still carried. It's strange how people who make a habit of belittling others feel so secure, never realizing their fall may be just one step away. As the cake was being served, my hand slipped discreetly into the inside pocket of my jacket. I could feel the envelope there, firm, waiting for the right moment. It wasn't just paper. It was a symbol, a proof, the embodiment of everything that had been denied to me in words. I drew in a slow breath, still holding back. Because in moments like this, every second of delay magnifies the impact of what's about to come. Let me pause here with a reflection. How many times in life have you swallowed your anger, waiting for the perfect time to act? That's the secret behind many silent victories. It's not about exploding when provoked. It's about preparing a response that cannot be denied. It's like chess. No matter how many moves your opponent thinks they're winning, if you hold the move that ends the game, nothing else matters. My mind wandered back to the hospital, to moments when I had to make split-second decisions between life and death. But here, at that dinner table, I realized speed wasn't the key. Impact was. And in this case, patience was my greatest ally. My grandson's birthday had become, without anyone realizing, the perfect stage to prove that respect and dignity are not negotiable. When the eyes around the table began to drift back toward me, I knew I couldn't delay much longer. The time had come to move the decisive piece, and at that precise moment, amid the clatter of silverware and the hush that followed my gesture, my hand slipped into my pocket. The envelope slid out smoothly, as though it had always been waiting for this exact moment. What would happen next wouldn't just change how they saw me, it would shift the entire family dynamic, because sometimes, all it takes is a single gesture to rewrite years of disrespect, and I was about to place that gesture right on the table for everyone to see. The instant I drew the envelope from my jacket, the room changed. It was as if the sound had been sucked out of the air. Conversation stopped, laughter vanished, and even the children, without knowing why, grew quiet. Every eye turned toward me, curious, expectant. I felt the collective weight of anticipation, just like in the hospital when I used to deliver a critical diagnosis. A sacred silence filled the room. Madison, however, couldn't resist mocking me. With a sarcastic smile, she crossed her arms and said loudly enough for everyone to hear, "Here he goes with his stories again. I bet that envelope's nothing but old papers, just another act to keep up appearances." That line was her last attempt to hold on to her sense of superiority. But what she didn't know was that every mocking word only amplified the impact of what was coming. Because when someone laughs at what they don't understand, they pave the way for their own downfall. I saw in her eyes the arrogant confidence of someone convinced the game was already won before it had even ended. I could have replied, but instead, I chose silence. I'd learned long ago that a steady gaze carries more weight than 1,000 arguments. I locked my eyes on hers, and in that instant, I saw the first crack in her posture. She expected me to snap back, to get flustered, to justify myself, but I didn't. I simply opened the envelope slowly, calmly, as if I knew time itself was on my side. And that's when the shock began to appear on the faces around the table. The curious thing about shock is that it doesn't come from the unknown, but from the improbable. Everyone had grown used to seeing me as nothing more than an old retiree, a burden, a background figure with no shine. And suddenly, that envelope suggested something entirely different, that maybe the image they had built of me was completely wrong. The silence thickened into tension. Each second stretched the air tighter, pulling everyone to the edge of their seats. When I pulled out the contents of the envelope, I saw my son-in-law's eyes widen before Madison even realized what was happening. He, who had asked the question out of curiosity, was the first to recognize there weren't worthless scraps inside. His face shifted from a faint smile to a mix of surprise and unease. Madison, noticing his expression, turned back to me with impatience. But now her confidence had dimmed. I could feel fear starting to eat away at the armor of arrogance. That look of shock is a fascinating thing. It doesn't come only from what is seen, but from what is suddenly revealed to have been hidden all along. I had witnessed it countless times in my career. Patients receiving an unexpected diagnosis, colleagues witnessing a miraculous recovery, families hearing unbelievable news. And that night, the same pattern played out, though in symbolic form. The shock wasn't just about a check. It was about the realization that the quiet man they dismissed had been carrying something that would upend the whole story. And here lies a valuable lesson. Never underestimate the one who stays silent. More often than not, the people who seem defeated are the very ones holding the biggest surprises. It's like in business, when the underestimated employee brings forward the idea that saves the project. It's like in relationships, when the disregarded partner reveals a strength no one saw coming, and that night it was me. The silence everyone mistook for weakness was nothing but preparation for revelation. Madison, now restless, let out a nervous laugh, as if to break the heavy air. But the room didn't join her. All eyes stayed locked on the envelope. Everyone knew there was something important inside. Her mockery, once echoed by a few scattered chuckles, now felt out of place, almost desperate. The other's astonishment was isolating her. And that kind of isolation is one of the greatest social downfalls, when the audience that once laughed with you suddenly finds nothing funny in your words. With slow, deliberate movements, I laid the folded check on the table without immediately revealing the amount. The suspense grew. I could feel not only my own heart racing, but others as well. Human beings are driven by curiosity and expectation, and I let that expectation build, rising like a wave ready to crash. And in that moment, I realized something. Once shock takes hold, it cannot be reversed. It opens a crack of doubt that spreads like wildfire. With every second, Madison was losing ground. With every second, I was gaining their full attention, and I hadn't even revealed what was written on that piece of paper. The impact had already begun, yet the true revelation was still to come. The room was suspended in an almost theatrical silence. Every eye followed me, as if the simple motion of my hands were a performance. I took a deep breath, held the check between my fingers, and with deliberate calm, unfolded it before them. I didn't need to say a word. The number on the paper spoke for itself. $750,000. It was like dropping a bomb in the middle of dinner. The sound of silverware against plates stopped. Conversations dissolved, and even the children's laughter seemed to vanish down the hallway. Madison froze. Her lips, so quick to mock before, parted without a sound. Her eyes raced across the amount, as if searching for an error, a trick, anything to discredit it. But there was no mistake. It was real. That check, lying exposed, carried more weight than any fiery speech I could have delivered. The humiliation I had endured was now transformed into a mirror, reflecting her own arrogance back at her. My son-in-law, who had asked the question out of sheer curiosity, leaned forward with wide eyes. His face revealed a mix of surprise and barely hidden greed. Other relatives exchanged discreet glances, like witnesses to a secret revealed without warning. To them, it was as though a hidden treasure had suddenly appeared on the table. But for me, it wasn't about money. It was dignity made tangible, respect turned into numbers. Years of silence crystallized into an undeniable figure. As I watched the impact ripple through the room, a memory resurfaced. Back in my hospital days, I knew how a single sheet of paper could change lives. One set of test results could separate hope from despair. And now at that dinner table, this check was doing the same, dividing the story of my family into before and after. The irony was painfully beautiful. The same daughter who once told me I had no value now faced undeniable proof that she had been utterly wrong. I didn't need to raise my voice. Leaving the check on the table was enough. The festive atmosphere had been replaced by a tension so heavy it could be touched. Madison's hands trembled slightly as she struggled to keep her composure. She tried to laugh, but the sound died in her throat. In that moment, I understood something. The most powerful revenge isn't loud, it's calm. Every second of silence was its own reminder. See, I didn't need to say a word. The truth is right here in front of everyone. Her reaction reminded me of a moment years ago, when a young doctor once questioned my ability simply because my hair had turned gray. Months later, he came to me, desperate for help with a case he couldn't solve. Life has a way of arranging these ironies. It flips the script when you least expect it. That check on the table was exactly that. A reversal so undeniable it needed no explanation. And here lies a practical reflection. How many times have you felt the need to prove something to someone? Instead of wasting energy in endless arguments, why not save your strength for the right moment? Show concrete results, a finished project, a personal achievement, even a quiet act of, character. These speak louder than any justification. Words can be challenged, but facts cannot. And that check was a fact no one could deny. Madison tried to compose herself, but the room offered her no support. The same circle of relatives that once applauded her sarcasm now sat in silence, watching. It's remarkable how quickly an audience changes sides when the truth appears. The mockery that had seemed convincing minutes before now sounded childish, stripped of weight. I hadn't humiliated her. She had built her own downfall. and the check merely lit the path. I left the check on the table, in no rush to take it back. I wanted everyone to see it, to etch that moment into their memory. It wasn't about money, it was about respect, about dignity, about value that never depended on anyone else's approval. Right there, in front of them all, the betrayal I had suffered began to transform into a lesson. And yet, I knew, the most surprising part was still to come, because that paper wasn't tea, meant for just anyone, and the choice of who it belonged to would alter the course of the night even more. Deep down, as I watched the check resting in front of my family, I realized this was only the prelude. The true impact wasn't in the number written on it, but in who would receive it. The dollar amount impressed them, yes, but the message behind my decision was what would change everything. That revelation, I knew, would strike deeper than the shock they were already feeling. The check lay there on the table like an unexpected guest, reshaping the night. Everyone stared at it with the same stunned expression, as if that slip of paper could rewrite the family's story. I could feel the tension in the air, thick enough to touch, each breath heavy with unspoken questions. Madison, however, couldn't bear the silence. She tried to seize control, raising her voice. "Dad, I didn't mean what I said. It was in the heat of the moment. You know I've always respected you." Her words were fragile, rootless. Desperation showed in her tone, in her gestures, in the way her eyes searched for support in the faces around her, but found only silence. Those who once laughed at my supposed weakness now sat quietly, witnessing the transformation. The reversal had begun, and she still didn't grasp how far it would go. I reached toward the check, touched it gently, and then lifted my eyes to the table. My voice came out steady, unhurried, the voice of a man who knows he doesn't need to shout to be heard. "This check is not just money. It represents years of sacrifice, sleepless nights, and hard choices I made to ensure this family had dignity. But this check does not belong to someone who denied me respect." Madison's eyes widened, her body leaning forward, as if trying to anticipate what I would say next. She began to mumble excuses about gratitude and recognition, but I cut her off with a single hand gesture. Because the real lesson isn't in the argument, it's in the clarity of facts. The twist was right there. The money wouldn't go to the one who expected it, but to the one who had shown respect all along. And in front of everyone, I announced that this check wasn't hers, nor anyone else's who had treated me as if I were invisible. It was meant for someone who had stood by me in silence all these years. That was when I spoke the name, Claire, my niece. A young woman who, without ever asking for anything in return, stayed by my side in lonely moments, brought me warm meals when my health faltered, and called to check in when no one else remembered. She, who never had much, gave me something rare, genuine care. The impact was immediate. All eyes turned to Claire, who, stunned, brought her hand to her mouth in disbelief. Madison, meanwhile, crumbled. Her eyes filled instantly with tears, not of true emotion, but of panic. In that instant, she understood that she had lost more than the check. She had lost the untouchable place she thought she held as my daughter. And here's a reflection I want you to carry into your own life. Respect is not demanded in moments of need. It is cultivated every day, in small gestures, in consistent actions. There's no point in saying, "I value you," when you realize there's something to lose. True value is shown through the constancy of care. And Claire, without grand speeches, proved it in every quiet action. Madison tried once more to argue, saying she had always loved me, that she had misspoken, that it was unfair to make such a serious decision over a single phrase. But I knew, and everyone else knew, it wasn't just one phrase. It was accumulation, the sum of glances, words, and veiled humiliations. The check wasn't punishment, it was consequence. The turning point was in showing that, in life, we harvest what we plant. Respect breeds respect, and contempt breeds loss. When I announced my decision, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. It was as if the humiliation I had carried finally found its counterbalance. I no longer needed to defend myself. The choice itself spoke louder than I ever could. The betrayal I suffered wasn't healed by words, but by silent justice. And that night, justice was done before everyone. And the most remarkable part is that this reversal wasn't about money. It was about values. It was about proving, in practical terms, that dignity has no price tag, that the education I had given wasn't in vain, even if it hadn't been absorbed by the one I most expected, because life always finds a way to reward those who show respect and correct those who don't. I left the check on the table, Claire's name already written, as proof that the decision was final. There was no going back, no debate, and while some were still processing the scene, I realized the greatest shock wasn't in the amount written, but in the lesson it carried. In that heavy silence, cut only by incredulous stares, I understood. The night wasn't over yet. The reversal had happened, but the true impact was still to come. When I revealed, once and for all, who the rightful owner of that check would be, the entire room seemed to hold its breath. The check lay on the table like a silent verdict, and everyone waited for the final word. I could feel the weight of their eyes on me, expectation, curiosity, even a trace of fear. This wasn't just about money, it was about the meaning behind it. The announcement I was about to make wouldn't only decide the fate of a large sum, but would also reveal who within this family had cultivated respect, dignity, and gratitude. I lifted my gaze and let the silence stretch a little longer. Sometimes the pause before the revelation is as powerful as the revelation itself. It was like in the hospital, when I held back test results for a moment before speaking, that waiting gave people time to reflect on their choices and fears. At that dinner, the atmosphere was the same. The silence exposed guilt in some and sparked hope in others. Finally, with steady resolve, I broke the quiet. This check will not go to those who disrespected me, nor to those who mistook my silence for weakness. This check belongs to the one who, through the years, has shown what money can never buy: respect and gratitude. A soft murmur swept through the room. I saw Madison squirm in her chair, her face shifting between disbelief and panic. She knew, even before I said the name, that she would not be the one. It was as if, for the first time, she realized that the words we throw at others eventually return as echoes. Then I lifted the check and read aloud the name written on it: Claire Miller. My niece's eyes widened in shock. Her hand trembled as it covered her mouth, and tears welled up instantly. She was speechless. Claire, the same young woman who visited me for no reason at all, who brought me hot soup when my health faltered, who sat with me to hear old stories when everyone else was too busy. She never expected anything in return, and maybe that's why she deserved it even more. The glances around the table split. Some relatives nodded in approval, recognizing the sense behind my choice. Others, clearly moved by greed, couldn't hide their discomfort. But the most striking expression was Madison's. She couldn't believe it. Her tear-filled eyes searched desperately for an escape, an excuse, anything that might undo the scene. "Dad, you can't be serious," she stammered, her voice breaking. "I'm your daughter. That money should be mine." I took a deep breath and answered with the calm that only truth can bring. "Being my daughter by blood doesn't guarantee respect. Family is not just about sharing a name, but about cultivating dignity in the little things. Claire gave me that every single day. You, Madison, chose to humiliate me, and now you must face the consequence of that choice." Her tears flowed freely, and the entire table remained silent. There was no way to contest my words. They weren't baseless accusations. They were undeniable truths, the product of years of lived experience. I wasn't punishing her. I was simply reflecting back the results of her own actions. And this is a point everyone should reflect on. It's not enough to hold a title: child, friend, colleague. What sustains any relationship is consistent respect. It's like a plant that must be watered every day. Neglect it, and it withers. Madison neglected it, and the result lay there, before the whole family. I slid the check across the table toward Claire. That simple gesture carried more weight than any speech. It was like signing a silent contract, proof that life rewards those who value and corrects those who scorn. There was no more room for debate. The name was written, the decision made, the announcement irrevocable. As Claire wept with gratitude and Madison with regret, I realized that moment would be remembered for years, not because of the money, but because of the lesson it carried. It was proof that dignity cannot be bought, and that gratitude, even awe, when silent, always finds its reward. And still, I knew the scene wasn't finished, because after the announcement would come the reactions, the apologies, the pleas, and that was where the real lesson would deepen. After all, the downfall of those who humiliate rarely happens quietly. It comes with tears, excuses, and a late plea for forgiveness. Madison could no longer hold up her mask. The tears, once restrained, streamed down her face in waves. Her body shook, her proud posture collapsing like a cracked statue crumbling before everyone's eyes. For the first time in a long time, I saw my daughter stripped of arrogance. She was no longer the woman who cut me down with sharp words, but a lost daughter, confronted at last, with the consequences of her choices. She stood up abruptly, walked around the table, and fell to her knees before me. She clutched my hands tightly, as if trying to hold not just my fingers, but the very history she had rejected until that moment. Through sobs, she pleaded, "Dad, please, forgive me. I didn't know what I was saying. I didn't know what I was doing." The entire room watched in absolute silence. The atmosphere carried a weight beyond money or inheritance. It was something deeper. Family ties laid bare, wounds exposed, truth revealed. This wasn't just Madison's downfall. It was also an opportunity for everyone present to reflect on how respect, or the lack of it, shapes every corner of our lives. I looked at her, still on her knees, and took a deep breath. My voice came out calm, without bitterness, but firm like a sentence. Respect is not something you ask for when it's convenient. Respect is cultivated every single day. You chose to treat me as if I had no worth. Now you must learn that dignity lost cannot be bought back with tears or with last-minute apologies. Her sobs grew louder. Some relatives tried to intercede with their eyes, but no one dared to speak. The lesson wasn't just for her, it was for everyone. Many of them, perhaps, had treated their own parents or grandparents as burdens, and now they saw, right before their eyes, the concrete consequence of such behavior. It was like holding up an uncomfortable mirror, one that reflected not only Madison's image, but theirs as well. That was what struck me most, realizing that humiliation can turn into liberation when we choose not to bow our heads. My daughter's betrayal had been painful, but it became fertile ground for me to prove, not just to her, but to everyone, that dignity is non-negotiable. It's like gold. It can be hidden, ignored, overlooked, but it never loses its value. And when it finally appears, it shines, undeniably. As Madison remained on her knees, I understood that the check wasn't just an amount of money. It was a symbol. It represented that life always gives back double, not in material wealth, but in profound lessons. Claire, moved to tears, cried quietly, realizing that her quiet care, her simple visits, her kind words were finally being acknowledged. That was the real inheritance, the proof that silent gratitude is worth more than grand speeches. I stood up slowly, withdrew my hands from hers, and finished. "Get up, Madison. The floor won't give you back what you've lost. What you lack isn't money, it's understanding. And I truly hope that tonight opens your eyes, because money can return, but dignity, once thrown away, can never be bought back." The silence that followed was almost sacred. Everyone there knew they had just witnessed more than a family dispute. That night would become a story told for years, not because of the check, but because of the lesson it carried. And within me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Peace. The betrayal had cut deep, but my revenge wasn't loud. It was just silent and final. And now I want to ask you, how many times have you stayed silent in the face of betrayal or humiliation within your own family? How many times have you swallowed your pride just to avoid conflict while carrying the heavy weight of disrespect alone? Have you allowed others to strip you of your dignity in exchange for a silence that doesn't bring peace? The truth is harsh. Respect cannot be demanded at the last minute. Respect is cultivated daily. And if you don't set boundaries, people will continue treating you as if you have no value. My story is just one example, but at its core, it reflects something that happens in thousands of homes. The difference is this: what will you do with your pain? Will you let it imprison you, or will you transform it into liberation? Let me challenge you. Who, in your life, have you been giving value to that doesn't deserve it? And more importantly, who has been quietly giving value to you? Genuine, silent respect that you may not have acknowledged yet? Think carefully, because sometimes the greatest turning point in life doesn't come from revenge, but from the choice to put dignity at the center. If this story struck a chord with you, don't keep it to yourself. Share in the comments. What would you have done in my place? How would you react in the face of such betrayal? I want to hear your thoughts. And of course, don't forget, subscribe to the channel and turn on notifications. Because with every new story, you'll find reflections that can change the way you see life, family, and, most of all, the value you carry within yourself.